Hey friends! Today I'm going to show you how to paint these delicate white flowers on top of a dreamy blue-green backdrop. And of course, we've got plenty of white and gold splatter too, so fair warning, it's gonna get messy. Let's get started. I've got a 6" by 4.5" sheet of watercolor paper. It's 100% cotton, 140-pound cold press. I'm taping it down with some framing tape. We're going to be painting the entire surface of the paper, so taping it down prevents the paper from curling and buckling and gives us a flatter surface to work on. On the palette today we have hooker's green, turquoise, and indigo. I don't usually use paint straight from the tube, but I wanted some really concentrated pigment to create this really dark background. You could just as easily do this with dried pans, it just might take a few more layers for them to show up as dark as these. We'll also be using quinacridone gold, bleed-proof white, and gold drawing ink. You could substitute the bleed-proof white for white gouache or even white acrylic. You could substitute the gold drawing ink for any watercolor metallic you have on hand. Feel free to switch up the other colors as well with whatever you're in the mood for. These are just the colors I used. The brushes I used for this painting were mostly a size 6 round brush, but also a size 10 round and a size 8 dagger brush, and a size 2/0 round brush. I'm slowing down the video here to make it clear that our paper is completely dry at this point. We are painting this background wet on dry. The reason I chose to keep my paper dry as opposed to wetting it down is because I want to keep the colors a little bit separate. Of course they're going to blend some, but I didn't want them to bleed into each other as smoothly as they would if my paper was completely wet. Also, anytime there's water involved, it's going to dilute the pigment a little bit. I wanted these colors to stay very rich and dark, so by keeping my paper dry, the paint is going to be a little bit darker as well. I'm starting with the size 10 round brush for splatter. This is just some brush that I picked up at a craft store that I happen to like for splatter. We're going to be doing a lot of splattering and you're going to want some larger drops, so just grab any larger size brush that you have for this portion of the project. Because the bigger the brush, typically the larger the splatter. You need a pretty wet brush for this, so I've loaded mine up with water and I swirled it around in my hooker's green first. I started splattering it by tapping on a paintbrush handle, but I later found that I had more luck tapping it with my fingers. Clean your brush and keep some water on it and dip it into the turquoise and splatter some more. I'm trying to keep most of the splatter concentrated towards the bottom of the paper. The bottom of our paper is going to be the darkest part of our painting and it's going to fade up as we get towards the top. And repeat this process with the indigo. If the paint isn't releasing easily from your brush, you probably just need more water. So I often dip the tip of my brush in my water right before I splatter to help that paint release. Now I'm using the size 6 round brush to smear those splatters around. Although I realized later that I wanted a larger brush, so I switched to a size 10, so you might want to start there first and skip the size 6 altogether. You need some water on your brush, but it's one of those delicate situations where if you have too much water on your brush, you could get some puddles on your paper where all the colors are going to just blend together. So you do want some water on the brush, but you don't want it to be dripping with water. Also, make sure you rinse your brush frequently so that it doesn't pick up all the paint colors and just mix them into one solid color. By repeatedly rinsing the brush, it's going to help keep those colors a little bit separate. So every time you see my brush leaving the frame, I'm rinsing it off. Don't worry if blooms or hard edges form here and there as you're spreading this paint out. To me, that's the look I'm kind of going for with this background. I don't want it to be perfectly smooth. I'm okay with it showing some of those rough edges and uneven parts. This is only our first of 3 layers, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Once you've got your splatters all spread around, let your painting dry or use a heat gun or a hairdryer. When that layer is completely dry, we're going to repeat that process again. Grab some hooker's green and splatter, then some turquoise and splatter, and then some indigo and splatter. I'm using that size 10 round brush to spread those splatters around. Remember to rinse that brush frequently and not to have too much water on it. You can see how already our background is getting much darker. And down at the bottom, I have a lot of pigment, so I'm just getting that pigment on my brush and trying to kind of work it up towards the top a little more. Let it dry. And here is our third and final layer of the background. So do your splatter thing and spread that paint with your clean brush. Since this is our final layer, I wanted to take some time here to make sure that things are a little more even and the color balance was exactly how I wanted it. I was really focused on keeping the bottom portion dark and letting it slowly fade as I got to the top. Once you're done here, let it dry completely. Now it's time for grass. I'm using a size 8 dagger brush. This is my first time using a dagger brush for grass, but now I don't think I'll ever use anything else. It turned out so good. I'm mixing my hooker's green and indigo for my grass color and using the very tip of the dagger brush to just make these sweeping motions from the bottom to the top of the paper. With this camera angle, you can't see it very well, which of course I didn't realize until after I was finished. So I will show you what I was doing here as just a side demonstration so you can see what my brush is doing. You could also do this with a liner brush or a round brush with a really nice point on it. But if you have a dagger brush, I highly recommend trying this because it's absolutely perfect for grass. I dried that first layer and then I did a darker layer of grass on top of that. To make it darker, I just used a lot more indigo with just a tiny bit of hooker's green. Once your grass is how you want it, let it dry. Hopefully you enjoy splattering as much as I do because we're about to do it again. I'm using my Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. This has quickly become my favorite medium to use when adding white on top of watercolor, but you could get a very similar effect with white gouache or even white acrylic. This bleed proof white is just more opaque and usually only requires one layer, which I love. I'm using my size 6 round brush here to splatter that bleed proof white all over my paper. I'm trying to keep most of the splatter down towards the bottom, but letting a little bit rise up towards the top as well. You can add water to this to thin it out so that it releases from your brush a little more easily. I'm using some Winsor & Newton Gold drawing ink. I'm absolutely obsessed with this stuff. It is much more intense than metallic watercolor, but if you don't have this, you could certainly use any kind of metallic watercolor that you have on hand just to give this a little bit of sparkle, or you could skip it altogether. It's totally optional. After you're done splattering, let it dry. Now it's time to paint our flowers. We're going to use the bleed proof white for this. I'm using my size 6 round brush to paint some simple flower petals that are almost like daisy petals. Each petal requires just one brush stroke. I simply start with the tip of the brush, press down a little bit on the belly of the brush as I drag out the petal, and then lift back up again towards the end. And that's how you create this petal shape. I painted a few different looking flowers to make this painting more interesting. So some flowers look like they're angled upwards, some are larger, some are smaller, some are only buds. Have fun here and paint however many flowers you'd like, of whatever size you'd like, and in whatever shapes you want. What I'm doing here is just a reference for you. When you're all done with those flowers, let them dry. I mixed a little bit of quinacridone gold in the bleed-proof white, which technically bleed-proof white is not supposed to be used for mixing with other watercolors, whereas like with white gouache, you can absolutely add different watercolors to it. But I like to break the rules, and nothing horribly tragic happened when I mixed the two together, and I actually like the way that it looked, so it worked out this time. So go ahead and add some centers to your flowers. Now it's time for stems. I used my indigo and Hooker's green mix to add tiny stems to each of my flowers just to make sure they don't look like they're floating out in space. I used my 2/0 round brush for this. It just has a really nice sharp tip that I enjoy using for stems. After your stems are done, it's time to peel off that tape and your painting is complete. As usual, the camera does not pick up the glorious sparkle, but I am so pleased with how this turned out and I can't wait to try it again with some different colors in the background. Thanks for being here today. I hope this tutorial was helpful and fun. If you have any questions, leave them below in the comments and I'll see you in the next one.